Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay. Friends in the Dhamma, now is the time for the Dhamma talk, and so it's a good idea to understand what is the Dhamma. I want to talk about the basics of the Dhamma, even though many of you have heard a lot of these basics before, but it never hurts to reinforce them or remember them in the mind. Because they're the basis of all other types of teachings about the mind and Dhamma. Especially for the people newer to Dhamma, and these hopefully will give a good an understanding or a foundation in why we are practicing or want to practice meditation. But anyway, normally, the Dhamma, when you hear the word Dhamma, at least in Buddhist circles, it refers to the teaching of the Buddha. But then you have to ask yourself, well, what did the Buddha teach? He taught the Dhamma. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, the Buddha or the Dhamma? Of course, as the Buddha said many times, that he simply rediscovered the ancient path, the ancient truths that have been hidden and layered over with many layers of superstitions and other types of views about the nature of the world. But he simply rediscovered the natural truth. And so the Dhamma basically are the laws of nature. But more specifically, the laws of nature that govern the operation of our mind and the operation of this body and mind in the world. And there's many levels and types of truth or philosophies, religious philosophies, and so on, dealing with the nature of the universe, the nature of the world, who created the world, where it came from, and so on. But the Buddha was interested primarily in the nature of suffering and the nature of happiness, because these are the things that are inherent to every living being. That every living being on the earth or in the universe basically is trying to live in a state of peace and happiness, and to avoid pain and suffering. I think everyone would probably agree to that to one degree or another. And even down to a tiny ant crawling along the ground, if you put your finger down in front of it, it will stop or pause and maybe turn around or go around because it senses something danger there. And its desire to be free from danger and pain. And so in something as tiny as an ant, there's that fundamental underlying desire for happiness, or the search for happiness and the avoidance of pain. And so this also was primarily what the Buddha was interested in, not so much in abstract philosophies such as who created the world, or when or where, exactly what moment it was created, and so on. But the nature of suffering and the nature of happiness. How do people create suffering in their minds, and what is the nature of happiness? So that's what drove the Buddha actually to going out and on his search for the truth. And so the teachings of the Dhamma basically are the teachings concerned with the nature of suffering and the ending of suffering and the experience of real happiness. So, and the Buddha's teachings are summed up in the first two verses of the Dhammapada, which run something like, all actions are led by the mind, mind is their master, mind is their maker. Act or speak with an impure mind, then suffering will follow, as the cart wheel follows the foot of the ox. And in the same way, if one acts or speaks with a pure state of mind, then happiness will follow, as your shadow follows you around. So in these two verses really sums up the focus and emphasis of the teachings of the Dhamma, again from the Buddha's point of view, and all the practices, the way to live, think, and meditate that will help to purify the mind from those unwholesome states of mind that bring suffering, and the arising of the wholesome states that bring happiness. So really the teachings of the Dhamma are about the mind. And in another very important, profound statement of the Buddha, he said that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right here within this 5 or 6 foot long body with its nervous system, memory, and consciousness. So the teachings of the Dhamma are really about the teachings of the mind, because essentially it's the mind that creates our experience of the world. We're not saying that this physical earth and world doesn't exist, but it's the way that we experience it as being something evil or good or beautiful or ugly, and all these different types of mental perceptions and interpretations, value judgments. All these basically are created within the mind through the influence of past conditioning. And so, and a young baby, sort of inherits, you might say, these mental traits and characteristics when it's born, and is influenced by the environment around it to grow up and relate to the world according to the conditions of a particular culture or place where one was born. Whatever, if you were born up in a certain religious upbringing or philosophical upbringing, you naturally get programmed or reprogrammed to believe that the world is like this, or the world is like that, or this is the way the world should be, or this is the way the world shouldn't be, and all other kind of conditionings. And we grow up conditioned by that. And all of our beliefs and habits are basically absorbed or inherited through our family, environment, and friends and other contacts. So the young child basically doesn't have much understanding when it's born. Its mind is pretty much an empty slate, so to speak. And then we're taught to believe, again, as I just mentioned, in those various ways, for good or for bad. And unfortunately, in a large percentage of the world, because of our disconnection with the truth, and through the course of evolution over many thousands of years, the mind has lost touch with that inherent truth or connection with reality, and has been learned to have been programmed with all these artificial types of realities and beliefs and understandings about the nature of the world and the nature of the mind through so many different sources, as I mentioned. So basically, this is the predicament of the mind, and the predicament of almost every person is that they're conditioned by the types of culture and societies in which they were born and brought up, and basically they remain caught in a type of a prison of their thoughts and reactions, because no one has ever taught us the truth, really. We've been taught to believe certain things, that the world is this way or that way, but by and large, those are largely beliefs. It's not necessarily based on empirical fact or intuitive type of vision or experience. So the Buddha also was brought up in that time when there was all kinds of beliefs about the nature of the world, the nature of the soul, or I consciousness, and so on. But he didn't necessarily just believe any of those things just because they were expounded or written down in ancient texts, or because some great gurus or religious teachers said that's the way it is. The Buddha was more of a kind of a scientist. The Buddha took a scientific approach toward understanding life and the mind. And he treated this body and mind as sort of like the laboratory. And the practice of meditation as a way of using the mind like a microscope, and using the powers of mindfulness and concentration and wisdom. He looked within himself and followed the nature of the mind and the mental process through its subtler and subtler levels to discover where thought actually comes from, where thought and perception and habits actually come from. And so it was very much like a scientific experiment, using the natural elements of this body and mind. So, and that's what he taught about meditation. Meditation is the process of sort of self-discovery, using the inherent natural tools of consciousness in the mind itself to discover the truth that's within, especially, again, the truth of suffering and happiness. And one of the laws of Dhamma, again, the Dhamma are the natural laws. Sort of like one of the main natural laws, the law of cause and effect. It's like the law of gravity. If you throw something up, what normally happens?
Fall down.
Fall down. Sometimes with a big thud, right? So the same way, with the law of karma, if you throw something out of your mouth, those words go out and intermingle with other minds and bodies, create some effects, and some effects come back to us, either painful effects or pleasant effects. If you throw out greed, hatred, and deluded thoughts, then the similar types of reactions will come back to you. You call somebody a dirty so-and-so or four-letter word, you might get smacked in the nose or called a litany of other words, which causes pain. In the same way, if you throw something out of your body, like flip somebody the finger or punch somebody in the nose or in some other way use your body aggressively, then painful reactions will come back. But if you put out pleasant speech, pleasant bodily actions, non-threatening for others, then usually pleasant types of results come back, or at least non-painful ones. And even our thoughts are like radio waves that go out. And even our thoughts can affect others on an unconscious level. So those thoughts go out, let's say thoughts of hatred or anger towards certain persons. And the person may not say, oh, that person's thinking this about me, but it has unconscious, the body and mind is very porous, and our thought waves and vibrations go right through this body and mind like, sound goes through concrete. And it affects some unconscious types of reactions that then come back to us as some type of unpleasant or painful reactions. And they've actually done experiments, psychologists have done experiments with this kind of thing, creating experiments in which people are trained to think positive thoughts towards others that they may have had a contentious relationship with it. And just the fact of unconscious, sending thoughts out to somebody on a subtle level changes them, changes their reaction to you and so on. So these are very interesting things. But it's all to point out, basically, that, again, this law of karma. And so, most of the painful or unpleasant experiences that we have in life can be traced back to our actions of the past and thoughts. And what you might have said to somebody or did to somebody 5, 10 years ago or more still has karmic repercussions, still is coming back to you. If you told a lie about somebody or slandered somebody or used rough language, people remember those things. And even years down the road, they still might hold resentment or ill will or things like that. Or if you, physically harm them in other types of ways. People are out to get revenge. And these what cause people to have fear, worry, anxiety. They worry about what they did in the past they shouldn't have done. And somebody's out to look for them, find out, what they did. And so, people lose sleep, or they have worry, fear, anxiety, and remorse for doing things they shouldn't have done, and not doing things they should have done. So this is really the concrete essence of suffering in the lives of most people. And suffering basically has 3 levels to suffering. The Buddha defined suffering in 3 levels. Physical suffering, which of course is the natural condition of getting sick, getting diseases, having your bones broken, having your organs, decaying and malfunctioning due to various reasons that cause us, downright physical pain, right? Suffering, having a toothache. But these are all natural conditions. They're the conditions of the body that's subject to change and impermanence. And so, it's the level of physical suffering. But then there's mental suffering, which is not getting what you want and getting what you don't want, and being caught in a push and pull between pleasure and pain, trying to create or hold on to pleasurable feeling. Because at the essence of it all, every mind is seeking for happiness, or which means pleasurable feeling, a feeling that gives some pleasant sensation to the mind, like seeing a beautiful sunset, smelling some sweet, nice smell, seeing your long lost friend. So these give pleasant feeling. But then there's the opposite of painful feeling, reaping the results of your past karma, or just remembering, and worrying about things again that you did or said that you shouldn't have. Somebody's going to find out. So the mind goes back and forth all the time between seeking pleasure and trying to avoid the pain. But basically it's a never-ending process, because we don't know what the nature of pain or pleasure is. So even though people want to be happy, they do very things that plant the seeds for unhappiness too. And so basically it's also the dissatisfaction with what is. So another one of the natural laws, we mentioned the law of karma as being one of the principal causes of suffering or happiness. But then there's also the law of impermanence, that everything is continually changing. Everything in the physical world made up of atoms and molecules and cells, and from organic living things to trees and rocks and planets. They're also in a constant state of change and flux. And essentially, that process goes by itself. And we can't really control it very well. We can try to, but ultimately we can't stop the law of change and impermanence. And whatever we get is also subject to being lost. So we're searching for happiness in the perfect mate, the perfect soulmate, or the relationship, and you might, have some happiness with that for a while, but it's also subject to change. Sometimes very fast, sometimes it may last for a while, but even while it's lasting, there could also be ups and downs, and moments of distress and difficulty. But everything is subject to change, including the physical things that you have, the things you're depending on. A fire could burn your house down, or somebody crash into your new car, and people get angry about that or lament because they're attached, thinking that things shouldn't change. But change is a natural law. And if you're not ready to accept that change, then the mind suffers. And then it goes on to seek for more happiness. So the world is unstable in that sense. The mind is not satisfied because of impermanence. Things are always changing. So you always have to keep searching for something else to make you happy. Because by and large, the mind is dependent on the external world for its happiness. We've lost that inherent connection to happiness, which is the present moment. The way the Buddha saw it, that consciousness abiding in its natural original condition of awareness, of present moment awareness, which is the natural state of consciousness, so to speak, is a state of happiness. Because there's nothing to compare, nothing to judge, nothing to come and go. The awareness itself is a permanent, unchanging, stable condition. But people don't know about it. We've lost that contact with it. And so what people are attached to are the objects of awareness, the object of consciousness that comes and goes. And that's what they're clinging on to, because they've lost that connection with consciousness itself, with awareness itself. And all they know are the objects that are coming and going through that awareness. And so this is really, you could say, the essence of understanding, the essence of understanding the mind, and also understanding the process of meditation. It's a process of reconnecting with the natural awareness that's underlying our ego consciousness. And in that state of awareness, even the sense of I and me is seen as a creation of the mind. When a young baby is born, it doesn't have a sense of I or me. It doesn't jump out of its mother's stomach and stomp up and down saying, here I am. Although some people say the Buddha did that. But anyway, by and large, the baby doesn't have that ego consciousness. It's, according to child developmental psychologists, the mind of the newborn baby is very oceanic. It doesn't even have a sense of its body or its mother's body. There's sensations, of course, but it doesn't have that spatial or kind of space-time inference built into it yet. It's in a state of basically timelessness and present moment awareness. Still feels pain, of course. Doctor hits it on the backside, or a cat scratches it and feels pain, but that developed sense of I and me and seeking revenge, and that's not in the baby's mind yet. But then it's programmed. So after about 6 months or after some months, all the relatives come over. They give the baby a name. Little Johnny, little Susie, and they hold it and Gucci, Gucci, goo, and get it to giggle. And gets all this attention, people giving it things. So little by little, what used to be expansive oceanic awareness, a little nucleus of a me or an I starts to develop. And you call the baby's name and it starts to look. And now it's identifying its consciousness with some name floating around in space. And then the sweet grandmother comes over and gives the child its first chocolate. The baby tastes the chocolate, produces some sweet, pleasant sensation. And of course, that's what the mind is looking for, pleasant sensation. So little by little, it starts to identify the face of the grandmother with pleasant sensation. Then it starts to hope that that face will come again in the future in order to get the pleasant sensation. And that's the birth of the future and the past. The past and future is born at that time in the mind, because that's what we're looking at, and that's what's most important. And then maybe a rough uncle or somebody else kind of holds the baby too tight, or maybe doesn't give it anything, and so the baby identifies that face with somebody it doesn't really care for, because there's no pleasant sensation attached to it. Or it may start to attach a painful sensation to it. Then wishes that one won't come in the future. You get the drift? So this is really the beginning of the creation of the past and future within the mind. And it's all based on pleasant and painful sensations. What you see with the eye, smell with the nose, taste with the tongue, feel with the body, hear, and even think about. And so over time, of course, many years, all of this grows in the young person's mind. And it loses touch with the present moment, because now it's caught in the past and future, hoping that these pleasurable feelings connected with eye, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and ear, will come in the future, and the painful ones stay away in the future. Or if the painful ones come, it struggles to get away from them. And if the pleasant ones come, it holds on tightly with attachment, not to let them go. But again, they're subject to impermanence. So when they go, we suffer because of the clinging and aversion. And the Buddha, understood this phenomenon, very, very well, and saw that that's basically the root cause of suffering. is this disconnection from the present moment, underlying vibration of present moment awareness, and getting caught in the web, what's called the web, the spider web of the senses and its objects, and the memory of the pleasant and painful qualities that these objects have given. But basically it's the mind that is giving these objects those qualities, because people will experience them in different ways, depending again on your upbringing and so on. You know, you get two people in a museum looking at some Van Gogh painting. One person is praising Van Gogh, oh, such a wonderful artist. Look at that painting, it's one of the best. And somebody else standing next to him might say, ugh. And they get in a fist fight or a shouting match. One thinking that artwork isn't good, and the other one saying it's good. Who's to judge? It's only a visible object, but yet we cling to our ideas, and it leads to fisticuffs. It leads to bad words. It leads to fights and even death in some extreme cases, doesn't it? And this is attachment to all the different things, not just a Van Gogh painting. Foods, sounds, even thoughts, ideologies, religious beliefs. People are clinging to all these different things, thinking there's absolute value in them, when most of it is just conditioned value. And it may have some importance in certain levels, but ultimately, all value judgments, labels of beautiful, ugly, good, or bad are simply conventional realities. And they're useful for ourself and society, but if you cling to them too tightly, it leads to those negative actions such as killing,